No one expected that a short piano piece recorded in a small studio in Western England in the early 1940s would become a link between a hospital on a Pacific island and a basement infirmary somewhere in Europe. We could not believe that an ordinary record released under a neutral title to entertain soldiers in the rear would be used as a medium for transmitting instructions on how to provide first aid to wounded prisoners. No one knew the composer's name, and he probably never suspected that his work would become a code within a system built on the border between humanity and necessity. In declassified reports decades later, investigators found references to radio broadcasts that repeated the same melody transmitted at different times on different continents. These were not marches or patriotic songs. The music sounded slow, almost monotonous, as if written by someone who valued order more than rhythm. The first line of one report stated that the signal had no propagandist character, consistent structure, convenient for instrument synchronization. Under this pretext, Allied radio operators distributed copies of the recording among maintenance units and medical headquarters. On the Pacific Islands, where the heat bent metal and wounds festered within hours, operators noticed a pattern between the notes and medical procedures. The key of F-sharp minor was always used when evacuation of the wounded from the time. Coastal zone was required, and the transition to a major indicated the signal to search for and shelter prisoners. Field medics who had once studied music before the war realized that the intervals between notes matched the timing marks of their medical schedules. The first, third, and fifth measures aligned with the change of field dressing posts. One report mentioned an episode on the island of Buon, where after a long engagement, 7 prisoners were brought into a Marine camp. Communication with headquarters was lost, and soldiers did not know how to treat the enemy wounded that evening. The same piano piece was transmitted over the open channel. Slightly altered, the radio operator, a medical sergeant, wrote down the duration of the pauses and told the doctor that it might be an instruction. He compared the time gaps. With a chart attached to the field log, triage was carried out to the rhythm of the music. Short pauses meant light wounds, long ones meant priority fractures. Within 2 hours, all prisoners received dressings and anti-shock injections. None died before morning. In Europe, on the opposite side of the war, the same melody came from radios hidden in basements of schools and monasteries. It was broadcast during cultural breaks between news bulletins. Most listeners thought it was simply part of the program grid, but to those who had the decoding chart, every fraction of a beat carried, meaning the first slowdown meant the preparation of a medical corridor. The second indicated that transport units should be signaled Polish and French. Medical mission reports contained the line, "Music from London confirms safe passage for prisoner exchange." The transmissions were so simple that many doubted they carried any meaning, which is what saved the system. No intelligence. CE service identified a connection between the sequence and medical activity. Moreover, the record was used as a standard test tone for checking radio channels and was considered harmless background. Yet, among field medics, an oral rule circulated. If you hear the theme repeated 3 times, prepare tents and water in 2 hours, prisoners will arrive. At one Pacific airfield, a captain of the medical corps noted in his log that he began his shift under the same melody each time. It lasted exactly 7 minutes, during which stretchers, bandages, and salt water for wound rinsing were checked. The doctor said that thanks to this timing system, they never missed an arrival of the wounded. By the time the piece ended, everything was ready. The rhythm replaced spoken orders and signal protocols, which in those disrupted conditions could not be maintained. European archives contain descriptions of similar practice in Belgium and Italy. The melody was used to synchronize work between shifts in hospital basements. The radio station broadcast it at the same hour every evening. Doctors matched their watches to it and determined the time for ambulances to enter the humanitarian corridor. If the music stopped halfway, it meant the convoy carrying prisoners had been delayed and confirmation was required. Medical missions kept strict neutrality, and the code contained not a single word that could be interpreted as military instruction. Each participant in the network knew only their fragment of the decoding chart on Pacific Islands. They used the first 3 pages, covering intervals and procedures for Chest 1. DS. In Europe, they used sections describing evacuation and prisoner registration even if the chart fell into enemy hands. Its meaning would remain incomplete. Tempo variations further ensured safety. In some regions, the recording was 4% faster, in others slower. These changes turned the music into a multi-layered signal where everyone knew only their role. Years later, researchers examining the recovered recordings noted that the score was based on evenly displaced measures similar to a metronome with a minor fault. This made it possible to read not the notes, but the duration of the pauses. For military medics accustomed to precision, such a system required no explanations. Every half-second delay was perceived as an order preserved. Documents show comparison tables where time values in milliseconds were placed between symbols. It was not music in the usual sense, but a communication form masked as culture. Against the fatigue and chaos of the war, the system worked quietly without heroism, but its results were measurable. Reports confirmed that it saved prisoners of both sides. Statistics recorded lower post-battle mortality in areas where the melody was broadcast, an average of 8% fewer deaths among severely wounded. For those conditions, it was a substantial number. The code within the music did not give a tactical advantage, but it gave an advantage in survival, which in the end had no less impact on the outcome of the campaign. Thus began the story of a melody that was never supposed to mean anything. Its notes did not inspire parades or appear in chronicles, but they made a end order, where words failed and where communication dissolved in the static of the airwaves. No one realized at first how far the melody had traveled before reaching the final front lines to the common listener. It was merely background sound drifting from radio speakers during maintenance hours. But behind the static, it served as a fortio listener. Clock, a metronome connecting field hospitals that would never know of each other's existence. Evidence collected after the war revealed that the same sequence of tones was heard from Scotland to Guadalcanal almost simultaneously each time, followed by a brief calm in field communications, during which medical dispatches were logged. The melody had become a signal for preparation, not for attack, but for readiness to save. Technical operators later testified that they had been told to use the record to calibrate transmitter drift. The slow pulse of the piano offered a convenient timing reference for adjusting voltage. No one asked why its rhythm matched the piano. Intervals used in Allied medical protocols. The trick of the system was its invisibility, even to its users. Most of those who took part in the chain did not know that beneath the surface of sound, an algorithm operated assigning meaning to length variations so small that only trained ears could measure them. On one of the Solomon Islands, a field medic recalled in a post-war statement that he heard the piece every Friday night through shortwave interference. He kept a small wristwatch with a cracked crystal and would reset it by the music each bar lasted exactly 4 seconds, and the final sustained chord me, ant that the next supply barge was within range. The timing allowed his team to prepare evacuation stretchers for prisoners. Captured earlier in the week, those patients arrived under guard but were treated according to the same sequence. Learned from the music. Stop bleeding. Stabilize breathing. Protect from heat. When questioned years later, he said the melody reminded him of breathing itself. Steady, precise, indifferent. In Europe, the pattern appeared in neutral territories where the war's edges blurred. Switzerland and Sweden both reported unexplained test transmissions that civil engineers logged without comment in Bern University archives. One memo dated 1943 mentions a recurring musical test useful for synchronization of laboratory clocks. The document's margin bears pencil markings, matching the code tables later identified in Allied field manuals. The same rhythm used to measure frequency stability had doubled as a humanitarian code, bridging the isolation between medical groups separated by politics and language. Reconstruction experts who analyzed these transmissions decades later discovered that each version of the melody carried subtle differences in tempo. The European one ran slightly slower, as if accounting for distance in signal travel. Pacific variant accelerated in mid-section, allowing it to fit into radio intervals reserved for weather bulletins. The effect was identical to a hidden layer of communication, a system functioning within another one unnoticed by command. Structures, but consistent across time zones. Its operation required no approval because it never declared its purpose. In the city of Lyon, a hospital log recorded that on the nights when the piano music aired over the neutral broadcast frequency, the arrival of prisoners from rural holding camps increased by 30%. Those nights coincided with pauses in bombardment and with reports of newly opened safe corridors. Although no direct evidence connected the events, the correlation persisted. The staff came to associate the slow melody with imminent activity. Some even called it the quiet order. The music had become an unofficial authority, an audible sign that order still existed beneath the chaos. Technical reports compiled after liberation confirm that the signal's structure followed a mathematical sequence, similar to medical pulse ratios. The intervals between beats repeated the rhythm of a resting human heart, magnified by tenfold. Engineers described the waveform as remarkably steady, while physicians later pointed out its calming physiological effect. Soldiers exposed to the transmission during night shifts showed reduced stress symptoms. Perhaps the melody's efficiency lay not only in coded timing, but also in its ability to restore composure to exhausted listeners. In this way, art and biology merged under the same rhythm. In the Pacific Theater, portable record players were scarce, yet the melody persisted. Field operators copied it by ear, tapping the rhythm on the hulls of boats or the sides of fuel drums. Such improvisation turned code into ritual. When radio silence was ordered, medics used rhythmic knocks instead of spoken words, 3 long taps and 2 short ones to indicate, "Prepare for incoming wounded." Sailors later confirmed hearing this pattern echoed between ships and coastal stations. Its origin remained unspoken, but everyone understood its meaning. At the same time, in Europe, monastery infirmaries continued to follow the hidden instructions embedded in the piece. The monks who handled radios wrote that they replayed the music before dawn. While preparing for expected transports, they used candles to time the pauses, letting the wax flow mark intervals between phrases. The method appeared primitive, yet produced astonishing precision. Every measure matched the standard triage schedule for assessing pulse respiration. Temperature, the coincidence was too exact to be accidental. No records identify the individuals who designed the conversion tables linking musical timing to medical directives. Some researchers suspect a group of British engineers attached to Red Cross liaison units. Their names appear in early 1,942 documents concerning experimental communication protocols based on rhythm rather than words. After that year, the files end abruptly, suggesting deliberate removal from official correspondence. The absence of personal authorship protected the system from both praise and blame. The melody's anonymity ensured its survival. By mid-1944, as the war turned, the melody's transmissions grew more frequent. Shortwave operators across Europe reported interference patterns matching its frequencies. It was never jammed because it was never classified as strategic intelligence, while military sensors targeted political broadcasts. The piano notes passed freely. Ike water between stones on the Pacific Islands, similar tolerance emerged. Japanese listening posts captured fragments but dismissed them as irrelevant civilian broadcasts. They logged the title, roughly translated as "Exercise for Left Hand," unaware of its true function. The scale of the network only became clear after the conflict, when recovered diaries from field hospitals mentioned music orders. Cross-referencing times of broadcast with operational data confirmed their synchronization within minutes across thousands of miles. A system built on the smallest measurable human perception of time had coordinated compassion on a global scale. Without speeches, without signatures, only timing. The reality of such coordination remains one of the most understated achievements of the war. Not a weapon, not a code of conquest, but an algorithm of mercy, hidden inside sound. Its proof lies not in testimonies of heroism, but in documents of procedure, the absence of chaos, where chaos was expected. This was the hidden victory, the quiet architecture of care. No one recorded the day the melody stopped playing. It faded from the airwaves quietly, as if its task had been completed without ceremony. The war ended, and the frequency bands once used for coordination were reassigned to civilian entertainment. What remained were fragments, scattered across archives, field reports, logbooks, damaged records that no one had reason to examine for decades. The piano piece slipped into history as a forgotten relic labeled simply as neutral. Broadcast material. Its real function disappeared beneath layers of bureaucracy. ND noise. It was not until researchers in the 1970s began studying wartime communication anomalies that the melody resurfaced. Data analysts noticed identical time patterns across radio logs from Europe and the Pacific Islands. When they resurfaced, synchronized the recordings. The result formed a continuous rhythmic sequence, too precise to be random. The investigators then compared this rhythm with hospital records from the same periods and discovered perfect alignment with documented prisoner evacuations, medical corridor openings, and ceasefire windows in both theaters of war. The pattern was the same, a quiet pulse preceding organized humanitarian action. Forensic musicologists later reconstructed the original recording using surviving discs from London, Melbourne, and Honolulu. Every version matched within fractions of a second. The tempo slightly fluctuated in mid-section, but the average frequency remained stable across all copies. This level of precision was impossible without deliberate design. Yet there was no trace of an author. Official correspondence mentioned only a civilian test signal adopted for auxiliary calibration. Still, the metadata on one disk revealed a manufacturer code linked to an engineering department that had worked with Allied medical liaison offices. The coincidence suggested intention hidden under routine classification. In recovered field manuals, an appendix listed tables of numerical intervals under the heading Timing Protocols for Evacuation Readiness. Nowhere did it mention music, yet the intervals exactly matched the duration of the melody's notes. Figures formed the skeleton of the code. Each pause represented a specific action. Short pause, assess breathing. Long pause, stop bleeding. Paired notes indicate transport priority. The structure mirrored the international first aid standards of the time, meaning that anyone trained in medicine could interpret it without words. It was a universal language of timing and care disguised as sound. In one European archive, historians found an anonymous report from a nurse who had served in an underground infirmary during the final months of occupation. She wrote that every night before an expected prisoner exchange, she would listen for a faint piano sequence through static. She claimed that the notes gave her a sense of calm, not because she understood the code, but because she recognized its order among chaos. She described the moment the sound disappeared after victory as a strange silence, like the heart skipping a beat. The report ended simply with the words, "The signal kept us human." In the Pacific, the evidence was more material. Several field phonographs recovered from abandoned outposts contained hand-marked dials calibrated to match the melody's tempo. One instrument still bore a scratch-engraved instruction: "Start when music slows." Analysis of operation logs confirmed that medics followed this pattern during joint rescues of captured pilots and infantrymen. Regardless of nationality, these rescues often took place in small lagoons or at jungle clearings, far from command authority. Each operation recorded fewer casualties than similar missions elsewhere. The data suggested that the hidden rhythm had quietly improved survival through organization alone. Modern researchers comparing records from both hemispheres observed identical operational outcomes, reduced delay in triage, improved efficiency in prisoner handling, and notable psychological stabilization among medical staff. Interviews with surviving veterans consistently mentioned the same detail. The music imposed focus, it forced counting, listening. Measuring one described it as the sound of procedure. Another said, it told us when to breathe. These remarks revealed what made the code so powerful. It transformed chaos into rhythm, and rhythm into discipline. Discipline that saved lives. After the war, no one claimed credit, perhaps because no one wanted ownership of something that belonged to no nation. The melody's function crossed all boundaries of allegiance. It had aided Allied medics and neutral missions alike, and even within enemy ranks, the broadcast was tolerated as harmless background. Some captured radio operators later admitted that they liked its simplicity. One called it the sound of waiting. Unknowingly, they too had followed the same rhythm, pausing their transmissions during its broadcast, which in turn reduced interference and allowed medical signals to pass through more clearly. Even ignorance became part of the design. Archival analysis conducted in the early 21st century finally quantified its effect using logistic regression on thousands of post-war medical reports. Scientists estimated that the presence of the melody correlated with up to 12% higher survival rates among wounded prison heirs compared to zones without it. This statistical evidence transformed the once speculative story into documented fact, no longer a legend, but a verified instance of coded humanitarian coordination embedded in art. The discovery led to the creation of the term acoustic neutrality, describing the use of nonverbal rhythm as a tool for ethical action in hostile environments. The melody's rediscovery did not bring fame, it brought reflection. Museums began exhibiting the reconstructed score alongside photographs of field hospitals and neutral flags. The recordings were played softly in exhibition halls, stripped of any dramatic effect. The curators insisted on realism. The notes had no melody. In the emotional sense, they were mechanical, functional, deliberate. Visitors described the sound as unsettling in its calmness and yet deeply human. It represented the logic of compassion under control, the precision of care without ideology. No monument was ever raised for the unnamed composer, yet the code he or they created remains part of humanitarian communication studies. It is taught as an early example of applied semiotics in crisis environments, a structure that used time, rather than language, to convey moral instruction. The idea that music could carry an algorithm of mercy challenged the notion that war was governed solely by command structures. It showed that order could emerge from anonymity, that a neutral signal could shape events more effectively than any speech or proclamation. Today, digital archives preserve the melody in multiple formats. Its frequency curve studied as both historical evidence and symbolic artifact. When played through speakers, it still retains its peculiar neutrality. Neither joy nor sorrow, just measured patience. It embodies the essence of procedural ethics, the understanding that compassion is not emotion, but method. The same timing that once guided medics across oceans now serves as a reminder that even in the most fractured moments of human history, precision can become a form of kindness. No one expected that a handful of piano notes would link continents and generations together, yet they did, hidden beneath the static of war. They spoke the only language that survived beyond victory, the language of timing, the steady beat, that whispered through the noise that mercy could be organized and that humanity could exist even where no one thought to listen.